The city lights sparkled like jewels far below as Maxwell stood by the wall-to-wall windows of his office. 45 years old now, with silver streaking through his dark hair, he had everything money could buy. His company logo shone from buildings across the world. His face had been on business magazines so many times he'd lost count. But tonight, as the sun disappeared behind distant mountains, he felt nothing but emptiness. He walked to his desk, running his fingers across the polished wood that cost more than most people's cars. 12 years. 12 long years since he had walked away from his wife Sophia. They met in college. She was studying to become a doctor, while he was the tech guy with big dreams. They were young and in love, living in a tiny apartment where they'd stay up late talking about changing the world. Then came the news that changed everything. "I'm pregnant," she had told him one evening, her eyes shining with happy tears. But all Maxwell felt was fear. Cold, gripping fear that squeezed his chest and clouded his mind. A baby would mean responsibility. It would mean putting his dreams on hold. He was so close to his big break, just months away from the investment deal that would launch everything. So he made a choice. The worst choice of his life. He left her a week later, not face to face. He couldn't bear to see her eyes when he told her. Instead, he had his lawyer deliver divorce papers and a check. "This should cover everything," the note read. As if money could fix what he was breaking. That investment deal did come through. Then another and another. His technology revolutionized how companies stored data. Money poured in faster than he could count it. He built his tower, bought his mansions and his islands. Women came and went in his life. Models, actresses, business partners, but none of them stayed. None of them mattered. He poured himself a drink now, the expensive whiskey that he didn't even really like but kept buying because that's what billionaires were supposed to drink. The ice clanked against the crystal glass as he turned back to his desk. That's when he noticed the envelope. It sat on top of his other mail, nothing special about it except the handwriting. Handwriting he recognized instantly, even after all these years. His heart skipped a beat as he picked it up, turning it over in his hands. No return address, just his name and office address in Sophia's neat, precise letters. She had been such a careful person, organizing their tiny apartment, planning their meals, making sure they saved a little from each paycheck. He'd found it charming then, before he found it limiting. Now, holding this letter, he just felt shame. Maxwell opened the envelope with unsteady hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper folded around something. As he unfolded it, 4 photographs fell onto his desk. Children. 4 identical faces staring back at him. His breath caught in his throat as he stared at them. They had his eyes, the shape of his face, but they had Sophia's smile, her gentle expression. They looked about 11 years old. The age that made perfect sense if... He snatched up the letter, eyes racing over the words. Maxwell, it began simply. No dear, no warmth, just his name. "I would not contact you if I had any other choice. These are your children, quadruplets. Yes, that's what the doctor discovered a week after you left. I've raised them alone, and they've never known about you. I've respected your choice to have no part in their lives. But now I need your help. James, one of your sons, has developed a rare genetic condition. The treatment exists but costs more than I could earn in 10 lifetimes. I'm not asking for myself. I've attached his medical reports. If you ever felt anything real for me, please help our son. Sophia." Maxwell sank into his chair, the photographs spread before him. 4 children. His children. Growing up without him, never knowing who their father was. And one of them was sick. He looked around his massive office at all the things he'd gained instead of a family. The awards on the wall. The view of the city he helped shape. The emptiness of it all crashed down on him like a physical weight. For the first time in 12 years, Maxwell Donovan cried. Maxwell's sleek black car pulled up to the tall iron gates of Westridge Academy. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as he stared at the brick buildings beyond. Somewhere inside those walls were his children, 4 little people who shared his blood, but not his name. "Sir?" His driver's voice broke through his thoughts. "We've arrived." Maxwell nodded, straightening his tie. He'd changed outfits 3 times this morning, something he'd never done for billion-dollar meetings. But this wasn't business. This was, he didn't even know what to call it. A woman in a neat gray suit waited at the entrance. "Mr. Donovan, I'm Mrs. Chen, the headmistress. Thank you for your generous donation to our science department." The donation had been his way in, $100,000 to secure this private tour without questions. Money always opened doors, he'd found, but it felt hollow now, using cash to buy his first glimpse of his own flesh and blood. "The Mitchell children are this way," Mrs. Chen said, leading him through polished hallways lined with student artwork and awards. "Quite remarkable students, all 4 of them. They're on our scholarship program. Their mother works incredibly hard to keep them here." Maxwell's throat tightened. Sophia had been brilliant in college, top of her medical classes. Now she was working multiple jobs just to give their children opportunities. "Here we are." Mrs. Chen stopped at a window looking into what appeared to be a student lounge. They often spend their free period here working on projects together. And there they were, 4 children sitting around a table covered with books and papers. Maxwell moved closer to the one-way glass, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure Mrs. Chen could hear it. "That's Eliza," the headmistress pointed to a girl with long dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. "She won the national math competition last year. She was competing against high school students despite being only 11. Maxwell watched as Eliza scribbled equations on a notebook, occasionally looking up to argue a point with the siblings. The intense focus in her eyes, he recognized it from his own childhood. "Alexander is our computer science star," Mrs. Chen continued, indicating a boy with glasses who was typing rapidly on a worn laptop. "He built a program that helps our cafeteria reduce food waste. It saved the school thousands of dollars." Next to Alexander sat a girl with a book open in front of her, but she seemed more interested in writing in a small journal. "That's Olivia," Mrs. Chen explained. "Her stories have been published in youth literary magazines. Her teachers say she has an old soul." And finally, Maxwell's eyes fell on the 4th child, slightly thinner than the others, with a quieter presence. "And James," Mrs. Chen's voice softened. "Brilliant mind for science. He's been missing some school for medical appointments, but he never falls behind." James, the one who was sick. Maxwell studied his son's face, noting the slight pallor to his skin, the careful way he moved as he reached for a book. Yet there was determination in his expression as he showed something in a textbook to his brother. "They're inseparable," Mrs. Chen said with fondness in her voice. "They look out for each other. When James started his treatments, the others created a study schedule to make sure he didn't fall behind." Maxwell noticed their clothes then, clean and neat, but showing signs of wear. Eliza's sweater had a patch on the elbow. Alexander's laptop was an outdated model. James's textbook had a taped spine. He thought of the closet in his penthouse filled with suits that cost more than what Sophia probably made in a month. The watches worth more than a year of private school tuition. The cars sitting in his garage that he rarely drove. "They don't know who I am, do they?" Maxwell asked quietly. "No," Mrs. Chen replied. "Ms. Mitchell registered them as a single mother. There's no father listed on their school records." As if on cue, all 4 children laughed at something Olivia said. The sound pierced Maxwell's heart. Their laughter was bright and genuine, a family moment he had no part in. "They're thriving despite everything," Mrs. Chen said, mistaking his silence for concern. "Ms. Mitchell has done an amazing job raising them. Without him," the words hung unspoken in the air. They were thriving without him. They had each other. They had Sophia. And what did he have? Empty rooms filled with expensive things. "Thank you for arranging this," Maxwell said, his voice rough with emotion as he turned away from the window. He couldn't watch anymore. Every second cut deeper than the last. Maxwell sat in his car for nearly 20 minutes before finding the courage to approach Sophia's front door. The modest 2-story townhouse was well kept but simple, with potted plants lining the small porch and a wind chime swaying gently in the evening breeze. So different from his multiple mansions that professional decorators refreshed each season. He checked his watch, 5:30 p.m. Sophia had agreed to meet him alone before the children returned from their after-school activities at 6:15. His lawyer had called ahead, explaining that Maxwell wanted to discuss James's medical needs. After initial resistance, she had finally agreed. Taking a deep breath, he walked up the concrete path and knocked on the door. The sound echoed in his chest like thunder. The door opened and there she was, Sophia. Her dark hair was shorter now, with a few strands of gray she hadn't bothered to color. Laugh lines framed her eyes, eyes that hardened when they met his. "You're here," she said simply, stepping back to let him in. No warmth, no welcome, just acknowledgement. Maxwell stepped into the living room, immediately noticing the differences between this home and his own. Here, every space was used, every item served a purpose. A bookshelf overflowed with well-read books. A calendar on the wall was filled with color-coded activities for 4 different children. Photos covered most surfaces, the quadruplets blowing out birthday candles at the beach, dressed up for Halloween, holding science fair ribbons. 12 years of moments he'd missed, captured in frames he wasn't in. "Please sit," Sophia gestured to the sofa, worn but clean, cushions indented from years of family use. Maxwell loosened his tie and sat awkwardly, feeling out of place in his $3,000 suit. Sophia placed 2 cups of tea on the coffee table and sat across from him in an armchair, her back straight, her face carefully blank. "You look well," he said, immediately regretting the empty words. "I look tired," she corrected him. "I work 3 jobs. Hospital research during days, online teaching evenings, and weekend shifts at a clinic." She leaned forward. "But we're not here to catch up, Maxwell. We're here about James." She opened a folder on the coffee table, spreading out medical reports and treatment plans. Maxwell scanned the documents, medical terms jumping out at him: progressive neurological symptoms, genetic anomaly, experimental treatment protocol. "The condition affects his nervous system," Sophia explained, her doctor's voice taking over. "It was dormant until last year. The standard treatments aren't working, but there's a new approach being tested at Boston Children's Hospital." She pointed to the costs outlined on one page. "Insurance won't cover experimental procedures. I've applied for every grant, every program." The figure at the bottom of the page would be pocket change to Maxwell, but he understood it represented an impossible mountain for Sophia. "I'll cover everything," he said immediately. "Whatever James needs. The best doctors, the best care." Sophia's eyes flashed. "We've managed without your best for 11 years. I'm not asking for myself or for the others, just for James." Maxwell nodded, shame washing over him. "I understand. But please, let me do this." Before Sophia could respond, the front door opened. The sound of backpacks dropping and shoes being kicked off filled the hallway. Young voices called out, "Mom, you won't believe what happened today." Sophia's eyes widened in panic. "They're early," she whispered. Maxwell stood up just as 4 children appeared in the doorway. The same 4 faces he'd watched from behind glass now stared directly at him, their expressions curious and surprised. They fell silent, glancing between their mother and the stranger in their living room. Maxwell felt frozen, seeing his own features reflected in their young faces. "Mom." Eliza, the math prodigy, spoke first. "Is everything okay?" Sophia quickly composed herself. "Everything's fine, sweethearts. This is Mr. Donovan. He's going to help with James's medical treatment." Maxwell watched their faces shift from confusion to recognition. "You're the tech guy," Alexander said, adjusting his glasses. "The one who made BioSync systems." "I've seen you in my business textbook," Olivia added. Only James remained quiet, studying Maxwell with thoughtful eyes that seemed to see more than his siblings. Maxwell struggled to find words. These weren't distant children behind glass anymore. They were real, breathing, thinking people standing just feet away from him. His children, who had no idea who he really was. 3 weeks after their first meeting, Maxwell sat in the waiting room of Boston Children's Hospital, his laptop open but untouched. Down the hall, James was receiving his second treatment. Sophia had reluctantly agreed to let Maxwell drive them to these appointments, though she maintained a careful distance, speaking to him only about James's medical care. Today, she sat beside James in the treatment room, leaving Maxwell alone with his thoughts and the weight of what he'd missed. He checked his watch for the 5th time in 10 minutes. "Mr. Donovan." He looked up to find Eliza standing in front of him, holding 2 paper cups from the cafeteria. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, her school uniform slightly wrinkled from the 2-hour car ride. "I brought you some coffee," she said, holding out a cup. "Mom said you might be working, and I remember you drank it last time." Maxwell closed his laptop and accepted the cup with surprise. "Thank you, Eliza. That's very thoughtful." She shrugged. "The twins are in the game room." I needed a break from Alexander's computer talk. She hesitated, then sat in the chair across from him. "Is James going to be okay?" Her directness caught him off guard. Of the four, Eliza was the most analytical, always watching him with careful, calculating eyes. "The doctors are very hopeful," Maxwell said, choosing his words carefully. "This treatment has shown excellent results for other children with similar conditions." Eliza nodded, her fingers tapping a pattern on her own cup of hot chocolate. "I looked it up on mine. The success rate is 78.3% for patients under 12. James just made the cutoff." Of course she would have researched it. Maxwell felt a surge of pride at her intelligence, followed by the familiar ache of regret. "You remind me of someone I knew in college," he said softly. "She could calculate complex equations faster than anyone I'd ever met." "Your wife?" Eliza asked bluntly. Maxwell nearly choked on his coffee. "What?" "I saw your ring, Mark," she said, pointing to his left hand. "You used to wear a wedding ring, but you don't anymore. And you look at our mom sometimes like you know her. Plus, you're paying for James's treatment, which costs more than our house." She looked him straight in the eyes. "That's statistically unusual behavior for a random businessman." Maxwell set down his coffee, heart pounding. Sophia had been clear. The children weren't to know who he was until she decided the time was right. "Your mother and I were friends many years ago," he said carefully. "And yes, I was married once." Before Eliza could respond, a nurse appeared with James in a wheelchair, Sophia walking alongside them. James looked tired but managed a small smile when he saw his sister and Maxwell. "All done for today," the nurse said cheerfully. "You did great, James." Over the next month, these hospital visits became a strange routine. Maxwell would drive the family to Boston, sit in waiting rooms, and slowly begin to learn about the four extraordinary children Sophia had raised without him. He discovered that Alexander could take apart and rebuild computers with remarkable speed. He brought the boy a specialized laptop from his company's research lab, watching with quiet joy as Alexander explored its features with lightning-fast understanding. Olivia loved stories. During one long wait at the hospital, Maxwell found himself listening to her latest writing project, a tale about four orphan children who discovered they had magical powers. Her imagination stunned him, and he found himself eagerly asking what happened next when she stopped reading. James, despite his treatments, had a gentle determination that reminded Maxwell of Sophia. He never complained, even on bad days, and his curiosity about science remained undimmed. Maxwell arranged for one of his company's top researchers to video chat with James about genetic research, watching the boy's face light up with questions. Back at his penthouse office, Maxwell's executive team noticed the changes. Board meetings were rescheduled around hospital appointments. The CEO, who once worked 18-hour days, now disappeared every Wednesday afternoon and most weekends. "Is everything all right, sir?" his assistant asked after he declined a meeting with Japanese investors because it conflicted with James's school science fair. Maxwell looked out at the city skyline, thinking of the four children who were slowly becoming the center of his world. "Yes," he said quietly. "For the first time in 12 years, I think it might be." 5 months flew by faster than Maxwell could have imagined. James's treatments were working, his energy returning, his test results improving with each hospital visit. The doctors used words like remarkable and promising instead of concerning and progressive. Maxwell had moved mountains to get James into the experimental program, calling in favors from medical researchers he'd funded over the years. But as James's health improved, something else was happening too. The careful walls Sophia had built between Maxwell and the children were slowly coming down. Weekend visits extended from afternoons to full days. The children began asking if Mr. Donovan could join them for pizza night or help with school projects. Today, Maxwell had been invited to their home to celebrate James completing his treatment course. He arrived with carefully chosen gifts: books for Olivia, a specialized calculator for Eliza, coding equipment for Alexander, and a telescope for James. Nothing flashy or expensive looking, as Sophia had warned him about showing off his wealth. "You're early," Sophia said when she opened the door. She wore a simple blue dress instead of her usual work clothes, her hair loose around her shoulders. Traffic was light, Maxwell replied, suddenly aware of how nervous he felt. These visits still felt like walking on eggshells, one wrong move, and he might lose the fragile trust he built. The house smelled of birthday cake and the pasta dish the children loved. He could hear them laughing upstairs, the sound still new enough to make his heart skip. "How's James feeling today?" he asked, following Sophia to the kitchen. "Better than he has in months," she said, a genuine smile softening her face. "The doctors are amazed at his progress." Maxwell nodded, relief washing over him. "And the others? How are they handling everything?" "They're kids. They adapt." Sophia stirred something on the stove. "Alexander got accepted into that coding camp your company sponsors, by the way. He didn't tell you because he wants to get in on his own merit, not because of your connections." Pride swelled in Maxwell's chest. He would have gotten in anyway. He's brilliant. Sophia gave him a long look. "They all are. You missed watching them grow up, but you didn't miss who they've become." Before Maxwell could respond, thundering footsteps announced the children racing down the stairs. They'd burst into the kitchen with the energy only 11-year-olds possess. "Mr. Donovan, come see what we made." Olivia grabbed his hand, pulling him toward the dining room where a large science project dominated the table. "It's for James's welcome back to health celebration," Alexander explained, adjusting his glasses. "We've been working on it for weeks." The project was an intricate model of the human nervous system, complete with LED lights showing how signals travel through the body. James stood beside it, beaming with pride. "The lights show exactly what my condition affected," he explained, pointing to different colored parts. "And these green ones show how the treatment fixed it." Maxwell felt a lump in his throat as he examined their work. "This is incredible," he said, meaning it. "You all created this together?" Eliza nodded. "Alexander did the wiring, I calculated the proportions, Olivia wrote the presentation, and James directed everything since he's the expert now." "We're entering it in the science fair next month," James added. "Will you come see it?" "I wouldn't miss it," Maxwell promised. As the children eagerly showed him each feature of their project, Maxwell noticed Alexander had opened his laptop on a side table. The screen showed a DNA database search with side-by-side comparisons. His blood ran cold when he realized what he was seeing. Somehow, Alexander had run a DNA comparison using James's medical samples, and there on the screen were the undeniable genetic markers linking Maxwell Donovan to all 4 Mitchell children. Alexander glanced up, meeting Maxwell's eyes. The boy's expression shifted from excitement about the project to something more complex: confusion, hurt, and dawning understanding. "I was researching genetic markers for James's condition," Alexander said quietly, while his siblings continued explaining the project to Sophia across the room. "I found some interesting patterns in the database." Maxwell struggled to breathe. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. Sophia wanted to tell them when the time was right, when she was sure he wouldn't disappear again. "Alexander," he began, not knowing what to say. The boy closed his laptop with a decisive click. "We need to talk after dinner," he said, his young voice suddenly sounding much older. All of us. The dining room felt too small, too warm, as they all sat around the table that evening. The celebration cake sat untouched in the center, forgotten in the heavy silence. Alexander had waited until after dinner to speak up, his young voice steady despite the bomb he was dropping. "Mr. Donovan is our biological father," he said simply, his tablet displaying the genetic comparison. "The DNA markers are unmistakable." Maxwell watched as 3 pairs of identical eyes widened in shock, then turned to him with questions he wasn't ready to answer. Sophia sat frozen, her face pale. "Is this true?" Eliza asked, her analytical mind already connecting dots, recalculating everything she thought she knew. Olivia looked between her mother and Maxwell, tears filling her eyes. "Mom?" James just stared, his expression unreadable. Sophia took a deep breath. "Yes," she said finally. "Maxwell is your father." The silence that followed felt endless. Maxwell wanted to speak to explain, but what could he possibly say to justify abandoning them before they were even born? "Why didn't you tell us?" Olivia asked, her voice small. "I wanted to protect you," Sophia replied. "I wanted to be sure. Sure of what? Alexander challenged. Sure he wouldn't leave again. Maxwell flinched at the boy's perception. So young, yet so quick to understand the painful truth. That's enough for tonight, Sophia said firmly. Everyone upstairs, please. I need to speak with your father alone. The children hesitated, clearly bursting with questions, but years of respecting their mother's authority won out. They filed upstairs, though Alexander lingered in the doorway. I wasn't snooping, he said quietly. I was looking for genetic markers related to James's condition. I didn't expect to find this. When they were finally alone, Sophia put her head in her hands. This isn't how I wanted them to find out. I'm sorry, Maxwell said, the words feeling painfully inadequate. What can I do? She looked up at him, eyes tired but determined. They'll have questions, hard ones. Aren't you ready to answer them? To explain why you weren't there for birthdays and school plays and chicken pox and nightmares, because if you're going to be in their lives now, you need to be honest. The weight of her words hit him hard. Could he explain his choices to 4 children who'd grown up without him? Should he tell them how fear had made him a coward? How'd he convinced himself they were better off without him? The next morning, Maxwell arrived early. He barely slept, rehearsing what he might say, how he might begin to make things right. Sophia answered the door looking equally exhausted. They're in the living room, she said. They've been up since dawn, talking. The quadruplets sat in a tight group on the sofa, their solidarity clear in how they'd positioned themselves. A united front against the stranger who was suddenly their father. I'll answer any questions you have, Maxwell said, taking a seat across from them. You deserve the truth. Did you know about us? Eliza asked first, direct as always. Before Mom contacted you about James's treatment? Maxwell shook his head. No. I didn't know your mother was expecting quadruplets when I left. I didn't know about any of you until the letter came. Would you have stayed if you knew? This from Olivia, the storyteller, always looking for motivations and character arcs. The question cut deep. The honest answer wasn't flattering, but he promised them truth. I was young and scared. I convinced myself I wasn't ready to be a father. I told myself I'd come back someday when I'd made something of myself. He looked down at his hands. I was wrong. By the time I realized that, years had passed, and I thought it was too late. It was too late, Alexander said, his voice hard despite his youth. You missed everything. James, who had remained quiet, finally spoke. Why are you here now? Just because I got sick. Maxwell felt his chest tighten. How could he explain that James's illness had cracked open a door he'd been too afraid to knock on? That seeing them had awakened something he'd buried under years of work and wealth. I'm here because I finally realize what matters, he said simply. And I'm here to ask if you'll give me a chance to be part of your lives now. Not to replace what you have. Your mother has done an amazing job raising you, but to try to make up for some of what I missed. 3 years passed like pages turning in one of Olivia's storybooks. The Mitchell children were 14 now, their faces losing the roundness of childhood, their voices changing, their minds growing sharper by the day. Maxwell stood on the sidelines of the soccer field, cheering as James, now fully recovered and bursting with energy, dribbled past 2 defenders and kicked the ball into the net. The crowd erupted in cheers, but none louder than Maxwell's. Did you see that move? He asked Sophia, who stood beside him clapping. He's gotten so fast. Sophia nodded, a smile softening her face. The doctor says his stamina is better than most kids who never had his condition. On Maxwell's other side, Alexander recorded the game on a high-tech camera Maxwell had bought him for his birthday. I'm analyzing his play patterns, Alexander explained. I'm creating an app that helps coaches identify player strengths. Eliza sat nearby, her notebook open on her lap. At this rate, James's team has an 83% chance of making the finals, she calculated, watching the field with her analytical eye. Olivia scribbled in her journal, looking up occasionally to catch key moments. I'm using this for my new story, she explained. The main character is a kid who was sick but becomes a sports hero. Maxwell marveled at them all, these brilliant young people who shared his DNA but had developed their extraordinary talents without him. He'd missed their first words, first steps, first days of school. But these last 3 years had given him second chances he never deserved. It hadn't been easy. After the truth came out, there were weeks of awkward visits, hard questions, and occasional outbursts of anger, especially from Alexander, who found it hardest to forgive the abandonment. They need time, Sophia had advised during those difficult early days. They're trying to fit you into their world when they've spent their whole lives without you. Maxwell had taken her advice to heart. He bought a house just 10 minutes from theirs, not a mansion, but a comfortable home with a room for each child for their weekend visits. He rearranged his entire business empire, stepping down as CEO to become chairman of the board, freeing up time for soccer games, science fairs, math competitions, and story readings. His billions now served purposes beyond making more money. He'd established the Mitchell Family Foundation, creating scholarships for underprivileged children, funding medical research inspired by James's condition, and supporting educational technology programs that Alexander helped design. After the game, they gathered at a local pizza place, their regular Saturday spot. The owners knew them now, greeting them by name and leading them to their table in the corner. "Dad, can you look at this code later?" Alexander asked, using the word dad that had taken him nearly a year to say comfortably. "I think I found a bug in my program." "Sure." Maxwell nodded, still feeling a small thrill whenever they called him Dad. After dinner, "I got an A on my paper about economic systems," Eliza announced, pulling the paper from her backpack to show him. "And my story won the regional writing contest," Olivia added with quiet pride. "They're publishing it in the school literary magazine." James, flushed and happy from his victory on the field, slid into the booth beside Maxwell. "Coach says I might get scouted for the advanced team next year." Maxwell listened to them all, asking questions, offering praise, fully present in a way he'd never been in his business meetings, despite the billions at stake there. These ordinary moments with his children had become his greatest treasure. Later that evening, as the kids watched a movie at Maxwell's house, Sophia stopped by to pick them up. She found Maxwell in the kitchen, preparing snacks. "Look at you," she said, leaning against the doorframe. "Domestic billionaire." Maxwell laughed. "I'm getting better at it. Only burned the popcorn twice this month." Their relationship had evolved too. Not romance, that bridge had been thoroughly burned, but something like friendship built on their shared love for their children. "I never thought we'd get here," Sophia admitted, helping him arrange cookies on a plate. "That day when I sent you that letter about James, I was terrified you'd ignore it." Maxwell paused, remembering the empty man he'd been, standing alone in his massive office. "Thank you for giving me the chance to know them," he said quietly. "They're the best things I've ever been part of creating." A burst of laughter came from the living room, the unique sound of their 4 children enjoying something together. "Better than any billion-dollar deal?" Sophia asked with a small smile. Maxwell looked toward the sound of his children's laughter and shook his head. "Not even close."